Okay, hi everybody, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for this year's Tufts Law Day on the Hill. I'm Melissa John, class of 2000 and co-chair of Law Day this year, along with Darylyn Freitag. This is an annual event put on by the Tufts Lawyers Association. For those of you who are just learning about Tufts Lawyers Association, we're a national organization. Our members have two things in common. We have Tufts degrees and law degrees, and those are literally the only two requirements. If you'd like to learn more about Tufts Lawyers Association, there are going to be a few links in the chat if they're not there already. There's going to be a link to our webpage as well as an opt-in directory for our members. So you put your contact information in there for the other members. We have a few events coming up in April. As part of our Tufts Judicial Series, we have a virtual chat with the Honorable Andre Barrett Jr. of the U.S. District Court, California. That's on April 7th. We also have an event titled What You Don't Learn in Law School on April 14th. And we're very excited to have a TLA trivia night coming up on April 29th. And so there's going to be more events and more information about those events coming up in your email. So without further ado, let's move on to tonight. So when we were thinking of potential topics for this year, we started thinking about how we wanted students who were considering law school to know that there were other options out there than just the traditional law school associate partner path in a general practice law firm. And that if you're interested in a certain field, you could pursue that. And if you wanted to work for a firm, there were other ways to get there. And if you wanted to practice law and not work for a firm and work in-house or for the government, there are several ways to get there too. There are so many different industries that we could have focused on. We thought that it was really important to focus on healthcare and biotech because of everything that's happening in the world today. And also because it's super interesting. So we have a few housekeeping notes before we start. We do have some pre-submitted questions for the panel, but if you have any additional questions, feel free to put them in the chat. After this panel, we're going to have 4 breakout rooms and 2 separate sessions that'll allow you to ask questions of our panelists directly. And it will also allow the alumni who are attending tonight to share their experiences as well. And we'll talk more about that after the panel discussion. I have some thank yous. I'd like to thank my co-chair, Darylyn, for her insight and support. I really enjoyed working with you, Darylyn. Thanks also to our planning committee, Tricia, Sabien, Joe, Steve, and Liam. Thank you to Tom Dunn, president of TLA, and the rest of the national board for all of their support. And thank you to Amy McDonald, who's the director of shared interest groups at the alumni office and really helped us out in planning this event. And thanks also to Nick from TTS, who's our tech support for the night. Thank you to our panelists. We're thrilled to have you. And thank you to all of you, attendees, students, and alums alike, for being on with us. And so let's dive right into this. So there are more detailed bios on the event page, which I believe will be up in the chat if they're not already. But allow me a brief introduction of our panel. So first we have Emily Mahoney. Emily is counsel at the firm Faber, Dofer & Atrato, a boutique law firm that provides corporate and transactional work to clients in life sciences and technology. Emily received her bachelor's degree from Washington University in St. Louis, and she has a joint degree, JD MPH, from Northeastern School of Law and Tufts School of Medicine. So welcome, Emily. We also have Mehreen from the class of '99, who is a counselor on the board for the town of Wakefield. Mehreen received her JD from American University in DC. She was also the first Muslim American woman elected to a board in Mass in 2017. Currently, in addition to her role on the town council at Wakefield, Mehreen oversees the policy and legislative agenda for Planned Parenthood of Massachusetts. Next, we have Emily Kretschmer. Emily is a partner at the firm Krokitis and Bluestein. Emily is a 2001 graduate of Tufts and a 2006 cum laude graduate of Suffolk Law School, where she concentrated in health and biomedical law. Emily focuses her practice on regulatory compliance, strategic affiliations, mergers and acquisitions, and financing for healthcare and human service providers and facilities such as hospitals, community health centers, clinics, etc. And last but certainly not least, we have Suzan Levin, who's in class of '96. Suzan is the Assistant General Counsel at Pfizer. She is primary counsel to several core research divisions at Pfizer, as well as the platform technology units there, which I'm sure she will tell us what those are. Previous to her tenure in the pharmaceutical industry, Suzan practiced at Goodwin Procter in Boston, Mass. representing a variety of private and public company clients. So thank you again, everybody, for being here. So we're going to start with a brief description of your current position and how your role fits in with your organization, like what's your day-to-day like. And so Emily Kretschmer, we'll start with you.
Good evening. Nice to see everyone here tonight. So just to give a little bit of background about myself and my role at Croquetas and Bluestein, I'm a partner in our healthcare practice. I've been at the firm for 10 years. I've been practicing healthcare law since I left law school, so for the last 15 years, and it's just a really great space. A little bit about my day-to-day, probably like you'll hear from everyone else, I really have no set day-to-day, and what I start out with at the beginning of the day usually isn't how the end of the day looks. You know, in healthcare, things are always moving and they're dynamic, and in my space, I work with regulatory compliance a lot. So I manage a lot of long-term mergers and acquisitions in the healthcare space, a lot within the nonprofit healthcare arena but meanwhile, a lot of putting out fires, answering questions, interacting with regulators, and a lot of questions from my clients that you just don't anticipate when the day starts. So it's a really interesting area to be in. I think, you know, you're keeping up with the news and all the changes in healthcare. There's never a dull moment. So excited to talk this evening and share a little bit more about my experience.
I'm sure in the last year or so, there's been more changes than, than any other year in your practice. So we'll get to that definitely. Okay, Emily Mahoney.
Hi all, it's nice to see you all virtually. So like Emily Kretschmer, I'm also at a law firm. My firm is a boutique firm that's, you know, pretty much, I would say the vast majority of our practice is in either biotech, pharmaceutical, or technologies. And we only provide corporate and transactional counsel, so it's very specific. So, you know, there really isn't a typical day. You know, I represent companies that are, you know, all the way from just, you know, one or two individuals that have, you know, licensed an asset, or, you know, they could have, you know, created an asset on their own and are trying to kind of turn it into a company, all the way to companies that have, you know, marketed products. And so I do a lot of, you know, my practice is mainly deal work, and then also kind of advising on strategic issues that, you know, arise from a transactional standpoint. And so I work with manufacturing organizations that are producing drug product, you know, do deals between companies and vendors that might be providing services to them. I do clinical trial work for, you know, various products that are in the clinic, but there really isn't a typical day. And even though I try to start every day with a to-do list, you know, that you know, certainly it never ends the way I think it's going to. But it's, you know, it's a very exciting and dynamic field. And even in the almost 8 years that I've been practicing in the biotech and pharmaceutical space, you know, there's just been this constant change. You know, there's constant news. And so it's a really exciting and fast-paced place to spend your career.
Thanks, Emily. Okay, Suzan, how about you? What's your day-to-day like? Also, I'm assuming very diverse.
It is, and I think like the other panelists said, you know, there's the day I plan and the day that happens. Every day is unique, and it can be a variety of things. So what I do for Pfizer is I lead the clinical development transactions team. So we're responsible for managing all of the clinical related deals for Pfizer worldwide. And that can span anything from collaborations that we do with universities for, you know, unique type of research that we're going to undertake. You know, I can get a call from colleagues to be an SME, a subject matter expert on a deal that they're working on, but has a clinical component. So we'll step in and help them. I do a lot of, I spend a lot of time on the phone with clients, strategizing and thinking about, you know, is this the right fit? You know, the plan that you want to take, is this the right way of doing it? Can we think about it? What are the ups? What are the downs? And then, I think like every lawyer on this panel, we put out a lot of fires. Um, this year has been unique, I think for everybody, for us especially on the front lines with the COVID vaccine. My team was on that front line. It has been professionally exhilarating, to be perfectly honest, but exhausting. um, it reminded me of, my first couple of years post law school and, spending evenings and many nights at the printers. It was those kind of hours. Um, but it's professionally, it's been like no other. And I think I speak for almost anyone in this industry right now. It's really thrilling place to be. It's hard, it's interesting, it's forever changing, completely dynamic. Um, and if you're from Massachusetts, I once worked with a compliance lead who called Massachusetts the forever attorney employment state. Particularly in our industry, because it's always changing. There's always something. It's highly regulated, and you're always going to need good lawyers in this space.
That's very, very true, Susan. Thank you. Mehreen, how about you? What's your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, thanks again for this invitation. So just to echo what everyone said before me is that you start your day with such great intentions, and it never ends that way. So as Melissa mentioned, my day job is I work at Planned Parenthood. So I get to work on a bunch of different issues. I get to advocate for sexual and reproductive healthcare issues, and I get to advocate for funding for family planning. You can imagine if there's a Supreme Court decision or the state of Alabama or North Dakota decides to do something, it affects me. And so my whole day changes, but I get to work on telehealth issues and Medicaid issues and health insurance. What I really like about my day job is I get to work on the well-being of entire populations also. So I get to work on legislation related to immigrants and economic justice and racial justice and voting rights. I sit in a lot of meetings, a lot of coalition spaces. In normal times, I'd be up at the State House almost every day, and that just, it's a lot of Zoom meetings right now. And then in my unpaid volunteer job, being a town councilor in Wakefield, I get to work with our Board of Health and our public safety officers on all health-related issues. So I get to write policies on the opioid crisis and bylaws about selling alcohol in town, things that I never thought I would get to work on. And then I also sit on a board of a hospital. And so I sit on Melrose Wakefield Healthcare, and that is all about everything health related to the administration of a hospital that I get to learn, from audit to compliance to governance to everything that has to do with running a hospital system.
I don't know how you do all of that. That's amazing. So Susan touched on this a little bit, and I kind of want to get everybody else's opinion. How has this year changed you? Like, I'm sure it's much different than what you were doing last year. And so I kind of want to hear from everybody. What do you think about, are you glad that you're in the career that you're in for this year that we're dealing with COVID? Or do you kind of wish that maybe you had gone in another direction? Let's start with Emily Mahoney.
I think how this year has changed my work, especially being that many of my clients are in clinical trials. Last spring when COVID hit and clinical trials were, shut down or had to be modified to be, virtual visits, there was a big rush to kind of accommodate that and to try to deal with the clinical trials that were underway. And there was just, there was also a lot of shift, companies had to adjust their strategies. They had to figure out if they could do things, sending product to patients directly. And then I think there was kind of a slowdown for deal work. I think, anyone that kind of had something in the pipeline that wasn't urgent, I think for spring and early summer, if it could be kind of put on pause till we kind of got a little bit of stability, that happened. And then I think, come at the end of summer, there was a big resurgence where people are trying to get things done that they weren't able to get done in the spring and summer. So it's certainly kind of been a very unpredictable year, the last year. I had a number of clients that were seeking to get involved in COVID-related issues. So that came up a lot. I think there's been a lot of opportunity for, growth as an attorney. But like some of the other panelists said, it's been a stressful year for not just, professionally, but just for everyone personally. So I think, you really had to learn how to roll with the punches and adjust. But certainly, it has made me very happy to be in the field that I'm in. And it really has kind of reinforced why I enjoy being an attorney in, the life sciences and healthcare field.
Thank you, Emily. Mehreen, how about you? I think probably with Planned Parenthood, there are some major social issues that may have had to sit on the back burner this year because of the injustices that have been happening in terms of healthcare and related to COVID treatment and vaccines. So what do you think about that? How's your year been different?
Yeah, I'm really proud of the fact that we have 4 health centers throughout the state, and we immediately switched to telehealth, and went full on telehealth, as did most healthcare providers throughout the state. And so to be able to kind of learn that and learn it from a policy point of view of what we were allowed to do and what the federal government was allowing us to do and what the governor was allowing us to do. And then there was a piece of legislation that was working through the legislature to kind of keep, because telehealth is here to stay in Massachusetts. People enjoy seeing their mental health providers and their physicians and not having to travel in this time when, we were all kind of quarantining. So I think it was busier than ever. And I'm really proud of the fact that, our doors still stayed open and patients were still getting the healthcare that they needed. I think for me, so working on those policies and those guidelines to make sure that patients still got the care that they needed, because that's our mission. And then also that our staff was safe, right? And things, our staff were able to work safely. And what does that mean about laws that are passed to make sure that my colleagues, who have to travel to commute to work and have to get there, and making sure they get enough PPE at the beginning of it. When you think back of a year ago when we were all like washing our groceries and like we just didn't know, what this virus was going to look like. So I think there was just a lot of, there was a lot of unknown, but I think that's what excites us about this is somebody said, that we will always have job security. I think in the healthcare field, there will always just be a need for people to work on policy or contracts or legal stuff. There's just always going to be the need there. And so I think during COVID, there was just more of a need. And there were projects that went on the back burner, but the State House was still working like through Zoom. The administration was still working. The Congress was still working. And so we still had to do what we needed to do.
Yeah, that is true, that Zoom has made it a lot easier, including that we were all able to meet tonight. So I guess the world did keep going. Emily Kretschmer, how about you? How's your client base changed now that we have COVID in our lives?
So my client base hasn't changed. I mean, I represent the full spectrum of healthcare providers. I work with the academic medical centers. We represent a number of federally qualified community health centers, sort of the traditional healthcare providers that you think of, but a big chunk of my practice is in the human service area, where it's a lot of day programming and long-term services and support. So, right away when COVID came and there were the orders to shut down in-person services, we were there. And I think, the first start of COVID, it was a lot of listening to stakeholder calls, staying abreast of the guidance that was being put out by Executive Office of Health and Human Services in the states, and advising our clients who turned on a dime to figure out how they could roll out telehealth, because I think overall Massachusetts had been a slow adopter of telehealth. And now we're really have ramped it up, putting in place consents, figuring out privacy concerns, figuring out where there were exceptions and flexibilities that the government put in place during this pandemic, that as we've gotten further along, figuring out more of a long-term game plan with them to how they can really continue to provide services in a remote fashion, in an on-site fashion, and keep people safe. So I think this last year has been really exciting. It's been a lot of phone calls, a lot of webinars, a lot of learning, and just interaction with the regulators. So I work in a space where we work with a lot of post-acute care providers. So, nursing homes were really hard hit right out of the gate. And there's been a lot of regulation around how they interact, what kind of visitors can come, when the state's coming in, and how they do infection control. And it's a highly regulated, highly scrutinized area. So, we've been very involved helping come up with policies and procedures, reviewing compliance, reviewing surveys, and, just trying to help our clients stay ahead of the game and respond to the regulators proactively and continue to provide good care. Meanwhile, as Emily commented, we saw a lot of the deal work we do slow down. But at the end of the summer, I think people really started to look forward, and we've seen a lot of sort of the day-to-day business pick up again, a lot of the contract review, a lot of the deals and affiliations I've been working on really, they started to think again about the future. So it's been nice.
And Susan, I know you talked about it a little bit, but do you have anything else that you'd like to add about just the crazy things that have been happening at Pfizer in the past year?
Yeah, I think there's a book coming out. At least a documentary. I know that. For me personally, what happened was our deal work didn't slow down, but it changed, and it changed substantially just in terms of who the partners were and the scrutiny that was on the work that we were doing. So our sort of typical bread and butter work, became kind of our after work. And then, the daytime and the substantial portion of the time that we were focusing on were deals with respect to the vaccine, which meant working with a lot of governments and ministries of health. So it was a very different kind of tone and deal space for my team. For one example is the data sharing deal that was done with Israel that there's been a lot of press about. That was a deal our team did, and it was unusual in that you're normally you're working with other lawyers and or a outside law firm. You'll start getting drafts back from them. You're doing their negotiation. Here everything was coming in from the ambassador, right? And so it was different. It had a much different pace, and so that's one example, but we had many of those types of agreements where it was the partner on the other side was not our typical partner that we tend to do business with. And we had to, we were thinking on the fly constantly, and we really had to reassess our thinking about what our risk profile is, and what's important in this day and age. So it really did change the tone. I mean, for us, the pace was nuts. I mean, I'll just be frank about it. It was nuts. It slowed down a little bit right now. It's much better. We're working on more of the continuation, almost like the phase 2 of the rollout. So there's a little bit more, it's more controlled chaos. But the first 12 months was really, I mean, it was something else. But we never expected, to have the vaccine be the success that it is. It was incredible. I was watching our executive leadership team when they got the call from the safety committee, and you have our general counsel, our CFO, our CEO, and all these grown men and women crying when it came back. So it's been an emotional journey for all of us. So when I say it's really been professionally a year like no other, it really has. I can't imagine it repeating itself, and I hope it doesn't, but it really has been like no other.
Well, thank you all for kind of telling us about your current roles and really all you do. But I'm sure a lot of people on the, on this call and in this meeting are curious about really what got you where you are today. What was your path? And I'm sure some of you, as we've talked about prior to this panel, you didn't think you were going to law school. Your parents didn't, have that thought in mind as you were growing up. And I know parents have had an influence on each of you. So I'm going to go to Mehreen first, if you wouldn't mind kind of telling us about your path and where you thought you'd go and how you ended up where you are.
Sure. No, that's always, I was not thinking law school. If you asked 17 or 18-year-old Mehreen, I was a kid of a physician and a kid of immigrants. And so I was supposed to go to medical school, like probably actually a lot more lawyers than I actually, I think we acknowledge. And I started at Tufts as a bio major and ended up disliking chemistry and not really wanting to become a physician in terms of working with individual people. I didn't really want to hear about people's health issues. That was not what I really wanted to do. When I sat and thought about it, I enjoyed working in a genetics lab. I liked learning about system changes. And the more I thought about what I actually enjoyed about the sciences was kind of, working on system changes to make life better for the individual, but not really working on an individual thing. I took a class my senior year, an international nutrition class that I wasn't supposed to be able to take. It was a graduate level class, but I somehow snuck in and I fell in love with the idea of doing international nutrition and moved to DC and thought I'd do international nutrition, and then realized I didn't really want to go live 3 weeks out of the month in Kazakhstan. Not that there's anything wrong with Kazakhstan, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I switched to national policy. I still really liked health policy. So I kind of got a job working at the Institute of Medicine and working on, looking at vaccines and working at research labs and kind of coming up with federal policy. And I met all these attorneys who had really great jobs. They were like deans and ran nonprofits, and I had never interacted with lawyers before. I was a bio and English major at Tufts, so I didn't take a poli-sci class. I didn't take a history class. I joked that I lived in DC for 6 years and avoided the Capitol. But I started thinking if I wanted to do policy change and work for, Health and Human Services or the Food and Drug Administration, law school was the better way. It was a better fit than doing public health school or going to nutrition school. So I went to law school. I went down to American in DC. I stayed in DC. I loved it. And then my family was from up here, and again, kid of immigrants, and the pressure was on to come back. We helped you in school, and now come back. We moved here because of you, and you need to stay in the Massachusetts area. And took the bar in Massachusetts and have been here 16 years now practicing as a lawyer. But yeah, it was my funniest story about that is when I was applying to law school, I didn't really tell a lot of people. And I, emailed an English professor and asked him to do a reference letter. And he was like, of course I'll do it. He emailed me back, of course I'll do it. But you mean medical school, not law school, right? Like you sent me the wrong form. And I was like, no, in my head, it really makes sense why I'm doing law school instead of medical school. And, got everyone on board. And when I look back to what my interests were and what classes I took, it makes sense. But it just, at the time, it was not what I thought I was going to do.
And Emily Mahoney, how about we switch over to you? Did you have a path of not knowing where you were headed, and tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I absolutely did not think I was going to be a lawyer. I was a anthropology major in college, and I did kind of biological anthropology. So, studying bones and trying to figure out why that person may have died, or, how old the bones were. And so after college, I worked at Mass General Hospital doing infectious disease research. And I went into that job thinking I was going to go to medical school. And I just, I think like Mehreen, like I just started realizing that a lot of what my interest was not the actual medicine, but the kind of legal and policy things that go into the medical field. And so from there, I applied to law school, and I actually really thought that I was going to go in healthcare policy when I started law school. And, you know, as anyone that has gone to law school can attest to, you know, law school is very focused on litigation and, you know, things that really don't, you know, if you want to do healthcare policy or you want to be a corporate attorney, you know, other than a corporations class you may take in your, you know, 1 year, there's not really much to kind of guide you on your way or to, you know, focus your attention. But the good thing about Northeastern, so I because I knew right off the bat going to law school that I had this interest in healthcare, you know, in applying to law school, I applied to the Georgia degree program at Tufts. And so how that program works, and I think it does still exist. I think someone told me that, but you know, you do your first typical 1L year of law school, and then your second year is entirely at Tufts doing public health school. And then I went back for 1.5 years and kind of did a combo of law and public health classes. And it really, you know, I took everything from, you know, just straight out health law to, you know, intellectual property classes, which are certainly very helpful in my day-to-day now. And, you know, I kind of found my niche. I never wanted to be any kind of lawyer other than a lawyer that was in kind of the healthcare pharmaceutical field. And as of now, I never have been. But, you know, if I were to look back, you know, 15, 20 years ago, this is the last place I would see myself being now. But I'm happy I'm happy that I didn't actually go straight to law school after undergrad, because I think having a couple of years working really solidified what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I guess that's some advice I can give for whoever's on this, you know, Zoom that is thinking about applying to law schools. Work experience is good, and it really does help you, because I think you can kind of get lost in law school. You know, with classes, it really kind of steers you in one direction. And so kind of having some idea of what you want to do after is important.
I agree. I know that many of you decided to work in between college and law school. And Emily Kretschmer, do you want to talk about kind of your path, and really, you know, sometimes it's just facts and circumstances that lead you to make a decision, or maybe it's a course, as we were talking about, or maybe it's a professor or an internship. But tell us a little bit about what led you to where you are.
Absolutely. Like the two panelists before me, when I was at Tufts, you know, going to law school was not on my radar. I was an IR major, and I had, I think, community health certificate at the time. It may be something more now. So I was really interested in health policy and really enjoyed, you know, the community health classes and some internships in nonprofit that I was able to do. But, you know, I came out and thought I was going to go into iBanking, and I worked in finance for 2 years. So, you know, I totally had a different mindset, was in front of the computer, behind Excel, in an office every day. You know, I think my first week on the job, it was 9/11. So everything got thrown, you know, the financial industry was hit hard. So, you know, it just wasn't a rewarding job for me. And it made me think, what do I want to do? And I decided I needed to go back to school. And I came from a family where my dad was a physician, and I thought, okay, I want to do public health or I want to do city planning. And I couldn't decide. And there was a lot of encouragement to, why don't you try law school? You know, basically you'll be able to do whatever you want if you go to law school. You can go into public health, you can go into city planning, you could go into something you haven't even thought of. So, you know, I kind of took the leap, and I just really wanted to leave finance. So I took the LSAT and went back to law school, not really even knowing what I was getting into. I remember the first day they talked about the court system and how it worked. And I was like, wow, I just have never thought about this. But I loved it from day one. I loved being in law school. I found it educationally rewarding. I found it, you know, I made lifelong friends there. And I think, you know, having that break between undergrad and law school really made me enjoy my education and my path. And I also came in from day one, knowing that I was going to concentrate in healthcare. I went to Suffolk and they had a health and biomedical law concentration that after your first year you could take, and then take a lot of classes from adjunct professors who now I work alongside with. So that's been a really fun part of my career. But I was able to take the public policy piece of healthcare and turn it into a corporate firm job, where I've been in the firm side of healthcare since day one, working in a smaller firm setting. So I've been able to have direct contact with my clients who are providers and learn a lot about healthcare. And, you know, now I see my clients and all the work they do in the newspaper, and that's really exciting. But some of it has just been luck in how I ended up here and how I met people along the way. But, you know, you can't go wrong in healthcare.
Who was the panelist who was just speaking?
That was Emily Kretschmer was just speaking. And
Okay.
Susan, of course, as far as your path, I know we've had conversations about, you know, what led you to where you were and what got you there. Did your parents think you were headed to law school, or what happened in your experience?
They may have known before I did, to be perfectly honest, because similarly to Mehreen, I'm actually a first generation immigrant. I came here with my parents from Russia, and you know, basically, you know, structured my entire education and, you know, the career that I had in my head on the fact that I was going to be a diplomat. And I wanted to go into diplomacy. I loved languages. I loved government affairs, foreign relations. I deliberately chose Tufts. That was, you know, on purpose. I was headed for Fletcher. I snuck into many Fletcher classes and sat there, spent a lot of time at the Fletcher Library and loved every second of it. I was an international relations major as well. So everything's going according to plan, and it just seems, you know, it's all directionally correct. And then in my junior year, I took a semester abroad, also on an international relations program, where I was actually paired with a mentor for who was a not a career diplomat, but somebody who had gone into diplomacy later on in their career. She had actually been a teacher. And at one point during this time, she and I had a very frank conversations, because she said to me, Susan, look, I'm looking at, you know, you on paper, and, you know, you're Russian born, you know, you speak several languages, including Russian fluently, you're US educated. Which of the former Soviet republics are you planning on going to? And I just, it was one of those, you know, they talk about an aha moment. This was like, I'm going to vomit moment, because there was just no way I could go back and tell my parents, who had basically, you know, risked everything to bring me here, and say, I'm voluntarily going back. And I don't know for how long, and I don't know where. And it really stopped me in my tracks, and I had to think really hard. I'm like, and it made me realize that she was right. And I don't know, you know, what I was thinking in my own head, you know, obviously Paris, London, Brussels, and completely unrealistically so. And I really, you know, took stock in my senior year and started thinking about, what can I do? Because I'm still very interested in these topics, and I have this skill set, you know, that I want to work on, and what can I do with it? And law school seemed like sort of a natural fit. I ended up actually taking a year off between Tufts, and I went to Northeastern for law school. I was actually in Texas because I was engaged at the time, and my fiance lived there, and worked for a law firm, and ended up working on oil deals for former Soviet Republic, and sort of got my foot into sort of big law firm life and understanding how it works. so to, for those of the other panelists who mentioned about getting work experience, I absolutely, absolutely 100% recommend that and think it's critical, because you really are not going to understand what happens in this industry or any other unless you get a taste of it. And there's many ways to get a taste of it. When I graduated law school, I knew I was never going to be a litigator. I don't have the those are not my genetics. I'm much more of a negotiator. Again, with the whole diplomacy background field. So for me, going into corporate law was a natural fit. I love doing deals, and putting parties together and getting to a place of common ground, and where people are on all sides are happy and are pleased with the results. At Goodwin, I started out as a generalist corporate lawyer like every other associate, and as I got more senior, I spent more and more time doing public REIT work, which is real estate investment trust. It's a mix of public company work, securities work, tax law. So it's this hybrid mix, and I was doing a lot of those deals. But as in most law firms, Goodwin had it set up so that you did, you had your deal work, but you had ongoing clients that you were assigned to for general counseling and general issues. And my two ongoing clients from the time I was a first year were two biotechs. And I loved working with them, really loved working with them. And I started learning about the business, so I could, answer their questions as they came up. I was not a science major. I don't have a science background at all, but I learned. And I don't regret a second of it. It's been an incredible ride. But it definitely was not the path that I thought was going to take, especially even if corporate law seemed like a natural fit, on the biotech side, it really wasn't. But because I was open to it and I found it interesting, it blew my mind, because it was very much, you could very much see the impact that you were having immediately in the work that we're doing, because of the pace that biotech is going, or was going, and still continues to go in.
That's actually a really good segue into our last question. We only have about 6 minutes left. But somebody in the chat asked if you feel like when we had talked about the day-to-day responsibilities, you were often supporting creative projects in the healthcare biotech by helping companies and individuals. But do you ever feel like your job gives you the ability to put forward your own creative ideas and solutions, and how? So I'm just opening up to the floor, whoever wants to answer that.
I am happy to go first. In my job, absolutely. And I think it comes with time, but my clients at this point, my internal clients come to me for strategy advice. And we think about, how are we going to do this? For me, the issue, foremost on my mind right now is data. What happens to data that we gather from our studies? How do we share that data with our participants and with the world? And how does the regulatory piece fit in, and how we manage all of that. And yes, I get to shape that discussion and shape that policy, and I'm very grateful to have a seat at that table. And the fact that our legal division is a known and key member of the business team.
Great. Anybody else want to weigh in?
Sure, I'll jump in. So I don't necessarily get to initiate the ideas, being at a firm and our clients come to us when they need legal help. But certainly we have a lot of longstanding institutional clients that our firm has worked with for 30 plus years. So they really rely on us to help be strategic and operate like an in-house counsel. So we really, once they come to us with a project, we have a seat at the table. They value our input. They value, sort of the outside picture that we bring in, proactively. I work to make sure my clients are aware of changes in the law, because, they're maybe focused on the day-to-day and don't necessarily see potential grant opportunities that come through or policy changes. And so that's really, you know, even though I'm at a firm, you still get a seat at the table if you have that client relationship and get to have some input. So it's really nice as well.
And I think just speaking from the nonprofit government side, our whole job is to creative problem solve, right? Like people aren't getting what they need. They're not getting the benefits or the services they need. And how do you fix that? And my job as a, you know, advocate is to kind of be creative about what the solutions is and then convince lawmakers that my ideas are the best. So I get to be really creative. I think, you know, something I didn't talk about is Planned Parenthood is a C4. And so we get to elect people who care about our healthcare issues, right? And so everything in health insurance to how you administrate it is all coming up with the best laws. And you get to be really creative and come up with some new processes and some new benefits and, you know, simple things from we have a really complicated way of people getting food stamps. So we're trying to fight hunger, which is, you know, a public health crisis. And every month you have to like go through this really cumbersome project. Like we had a bill to make it an application that lasted until you told them that you had a change in your lifestyle, because there's no reason for you to have to fill out the same form and give a copy of your birth certificate to prove that you need supplemental money to feed yourself and your family, right? And that was a creative problem solving of like, hey, this is the way that it's always been done, but it's really not working. So I think from the nonprofit end, we get to be super creative. And it's just because like we, you know, I don't have to deal with clients like other people said here. You know, I've never gone to a courtroom. It is not what I do, but I will go and speak at rallies and speak at hearings and talk in front of governors all about, you know, how we just give better services to whatever my constituency is. So yeah, I get to be creative.
That's good. That's always rewarding when you can put forward creative solutions in your job for sure. So we have about a minute left. Thanks again to our panelists. I'm sure I'm not the only one who felt inspired by everything you had to say. So thank you. I might even go into healthcare. Who knows? I still have time. So we've reached the breakout session of our program for Q&A.